My late wife's purse was the only thing I had left of her. When I couldn't find it, my son yelled, "I sold it! I needed money for my cruise." I called the pawn shop, hoping to buy it back, but the man on the line sounded terrified. "Sir, there was a false bottom in that purse. What we found inside," I froze. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I'm 64 years old, and I thought I knew what heartbreak felt like when I lost my wife Hilda 3 months ago. I was wrong. Real heartbreak is standing in your own living room, staring at the empty spot on the dresser where her burgundy leather purse used to sit, and hearing your own son tell you he sold it for cruise money. "Dad, it was just sitting there collecting dust," Wesley said, not even bothering to look up from his phone. He was sprawled on my couch like he owned the place, still wearing the same wrinkled shirt from yesterday. At 32, my son had perfected the art of disappointing me, but this felt different. This felt like betrayal. "Just sitting there?" My voice came out rougher than I intended. "Wesley, that was your mother's purse, the one she carried every day for 15 years. He finally looked up, and I saw something in his eyes that made my chest tighten. Not guilt, not remorse, irritation. "Look, I needed the money, okay? The cruise leaves next week, and Melissa expects me to pay for both of us. You know how women are." He shrugged like he was discussing the weather. "Besides, what were you going to do with it? Stare at it forever?" The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the back of my recliner, the same chair where Hilda used to sit, and organize the contents of that purse every evening. She'd pull out receipts, count her cash, check her lipstick. Such a simple ritual, but it was hers. It was proof she had existed. Proof of all those ordinary moments that make up a life. "I can't believe you did this," I whispered. Wesley stood up, and for a moment I thought maybe he'd finally show some remorse. Instead, he crossed his arms and looked at me like I was the one being unreasonable. "Dad, come on, you're being dramatic. It's a purse. Mom's gone. She doesn't need it anymore." His voice was flat, matter of fact. "I got $300 for it at Jimmy's pawn shop on 5th Street. That's probably more than you paid for it originally." $300. He had reduced Hilda's memory to $300 and a cruise with some woman I'd met exactly twice. "Wesley, that purse was all I had left of her that still smelled like her perfume." It was. I stopped, my throat closing up. How could I explain to my own son what it felt like to lose the woman you'd loved for 35 years? How could I make him understand that sometimes objects become sacred when they're all you have left? "Oh God, Dad, please don't start crying again." Wesley rolled his eyes. "Look, if it makes you feel better, maybe I can buy you something nice from the cruise. They have good jewelry in the Caribbean." I stared at him, really stared at him, and felt something break inside me that I didn't think could break anymore. This was my son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike, the teenager I'd stayed up waiting for when he missed curfew, the young man I'd helped through college. Where had I gone wrong? "Get out," I said quietly. "What?" "Get out of my house." My voice was steady now, cold. "Take your things and get out." Wesley's face shifted from irritation to surprise. "Dad, you're overreacting. It's just a stupid purse." "It wasn't stupid to me." The words exploded out of me. "Nothing about your mother was stupid." And the fact that you can't understand that, the fact that you think it's okay to take the one thing I treasured most and sell it for vacation money tells me everything I need to know about who you really are. For a second, just a second, I thought I saw something flicker across his face. But then he grabbed his jacket from the chair and headed for the door. "Fine, I'm going to Melissa's anyway. Maybe when you calm down, you'll realize I was trying to help. That purse was just making you more depressed." He paused at the door. "And for the record, Dad, Mom would want me to be happy. She'd understand why I needed the money." The door slammed shut, and I was alone with the silence and the empty space where Hilda's purse used to be. I walked over to the dresser and ran my fingers over the spot where it had sat. There was a faint outline in the dust, a perfect rectangle that proved it had been there, that I hadn't imagined it. Hilda always kept it right there next to her jewelry box and the framed photo of our wedding day. I picked up the wedding photo, studying her young face. She'd been 25 then, so full of hope and dreams. What would she think of Wesley now? What would she think of me for raising a son who could be so callous, so cruel? The house felt enormous and empty around me. Every room held memories of Hilda, but now even those felt tainted by Wesley's words. Just sitting there collecting dust. As if love was something that expired, as if grief had a deadline. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat in my recliner, staring at the empty spot on the dresser. Tomorrow I would go to Jimmy's pawn shop. I'd offer $400, $500, whatever it took to get Hilda's purse back. I still had some savings, money we'd put aside for retirement trips we'd never get to take. But tonight I just sat in the growing darkness, wondering how the son I'd raised could look at his grieving father and see nothing but an obstacle to his happiness. Wondering if Hilda would be as disappointed in Wesley as I was. Wondering if I'd failed them both. The worst part wasn't even losing the purse. The worst part was realizing that my son, the last family I had left, didn't understand what love looked like, and maybe, just maybe, he never would. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Wesley's face when he shrugged and called his mother's purse, just sitting there collecting dust. By 6 in the morning, I was dressed and waiting for Jimmy's pawn shop to open, $500 cash in my pocket and determination in my chest. The pawn shop sat on a rundown stretch of 5th Street, squeezed between a laundromat and a check-cashing place. I'd driven past it 1,000 times, but never imagined I'd be walking through that door, especially not to buy back my dead wife's belongings from my own son. A bell chimed as I pushed open the glass door. The smell hit me immediately, a mixture of old leather, dust, and something chemical I couldn't identify. Glass cases lined the walls, filled with jewelry, watches, and electronic gadgets that other desperate people had traded for quick cash. "Help you with something?" The voice came from behind the counter. The man was maybe 50 with graying hair and tired eyes that had probably seen every kind of human desperation imaginable. "My son sold you a burgundy leather purse yesterday," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'd like to buy it back." His expression changed immediately. He glanced toward the back room, then back at me, and I caught something in his eyes that made my stomach clench. Nervousness, maybe even fear. "You said a burgundy purse? Yesterday?" He was stalling, his fingers drumming against the counter. "What's your son's name?" "Wesley Garrett. He said he got $300 for it." The man, Jimmy, I assumed, swallowed hard and looked at me like I was the bearer of terrible news. "Mr. Garrett, look, we need to talk. Can you step back here for a minute?" He led me behind the counter into a small office that smelled like stale coffee and cigarettes. The purse sat on his desk, and seeing it again made my chest tight with relief and grief all at once. It looked exactly the same, the rich burgundy leather Hilda had loved, the gold clasp she'd polished every few weeks, the worn spot on the handle where her fingers had rested for all those years. "There she is," I said quietly, reaching toward it. "Wait," Jimmy's voice was sharp. "Mr. Garrett, I have to tell you something. When your son brought this in, I thought it was just a regular vintage purse. Nice leather, good craftsmanship, worth maybe $200, $250 tops. I gave him $300 because he seemed desperate, and I felt bad for the kid." I frowned. "Okay, so what's the problem? I'll pay you $400 for it right now." Jimmy ran his hand through his hair and looked at me with something that might have been pity. After he left, my assistant was cleaning it out, checking for anything left inside. Sometimes people forget things in pockets, or there's old gum stuck to the lining. We always check. My heart started beating faster. And, yeah, she found something. A hidden compartment in the bottom. Real clever work, professional level stuff. You wouldn't know it was there unless you were looking for it. He picked up the purse and turned it over, showing me the bottom. "See this seam here? It's actually a false bottom." I stared at the purse, my mind racing. In 35 years of marriage, I'd never known about any hidden compartment. What was inside? Jimmy opened a desk drawer and pulled out a manila envelope. His hands were shaking slightly as he handed it to me. Letters, a whole stack of them. "And Mr. Garrett, I think you need to sit down." The room suddenly felt too small, too hot. I sank into the chair across from his desk, the envelope heavy in my hands. Letters from who? They're love letters. "To your wife." Jimmy's voice was barely above a whisper. "From someone named David Richardson. And sir, they're dated during your marriage. Recent ones too. The newest one is from just 6 months ago." The envelope slipped from my fingers and hit the floor. Letters scattered across the worn carpet. White envelopes with Hilda's name written in handwriting I didn't recognize. My vision blurred at the edges. "That's impossible," I heard myself say. "Hilda wouldn't. We were happy. We were married for 35 years. Jimmy knelt down and carefully gathered the letters, not meeting my eyes. "I'm sorry, Mr. Garrett. I really am. I've been in this business for 20 years, and this is the worst thing I've ever had to tell someone. I watched him stack the letters neatly, my brain refusing to process what he was saying. Hilda had been sick for the last 2 years of her life. Cancer. I'd driven her to every appointment, held her hand through every treatment, slept in hospital chairs when she was too weak to come home. When had she had time for letters? When had she had the energy for whatever this was? How many letters? My voice sounded like it was coming from someone else. 18. Some are pretty old, maybe 15 years or so. Others are recent. Jimmy set the stack on his desk. Mr. Garrett, I don't know if you want to read these. Sometimes ignorance is. I need to see them. He hesitated, then handed me the top letter. It was postmarked 6 months before Hilda died, addressed to her in careful cursive. I opened it with trembling fingers. My dearest Hilda, it began. I know these letters are risky, but I can't stop writing to you. Seeing you at the grocery store yesterday and pretending we were just neighbors nearly killed me. When you smiled at me, I wanted to tell everyone in that store that you're the love of my life, that you have been for 20 years. I know you can't leave Tyson, especially now that he's taking such good care of you, but please know that every day without you is agony. I love you more than life itself. Always yours, David. The letter fell from my hands. I stared at Jimmy, who was watching me with the expression of someone witnessing a car accident. 20 years. I whispered. She was having an affair for 20 years. Mr. Garrett. David Richardson. The name felt foreign in my mouth. I know that name. He lived 2 streets over. His wife died. God, his wife died 8 years ago. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of something that made no sense at all. Hilda went to the funeral. She cried at the funeral. The room was spinning. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about my marriage, about the woman I'd loved and grieved for, was crumbling around me. Hilda had been living a double life. For 20 years, she'd been in love with another man while I cooked her dinner, held her when she was scared, and believed we were soulmates. Jimmy cleared his throat. There's something else, Mr. Garrett. Some of the letters. They mention your son. I looked up at him, and the expression on his face told me that whatever was coming next would be even worse than what I'd already learned. What about Wesley? Jimmy picked up another letter, this one yellowed with age. This one's from 16 years ago, right around the time your son would have been born. He paused. Mr. Garrett, I think you need to read this one too. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the paper, but I read it. I read every word that would destroy what was left of my world. The letter from 16 years ago was written in the same careful handwriting, but the words were different. Desperate, pleading. My beloved Hilda, it read, I can't stop thinking about what happened between us last month. I know you're scared, and I know this complicates everything, but I need you to know that I'm here for you no matter what you decide. If the baby is mine, I will find a way to be part of his life. I don't care what it costs me. I love you, and I will love this child because he's part of you. But Hilda, please, you have to tell me the truth. Is Wesley my son? The paper slipped from my hands and drifted to the floor. I sat there staring at it, my mind completely blank. Wesley, my son. The boy I'd raised, the man I'd just thrown out of my house for selling his mother's purse, the son who might not be my son at all. Mr. Garrett, Jimmy's voice seemed to come from far away. Are you okay? Should I call someone? I couldn't answer, couldn't breathe. 32 years. 32 years of believing Wesley was my blood, my legacy, my family. 32 years of midnight feedings and first steps and baseball games and parent-teacher conferences. 32 years of loving a child who might belong to another man. There's more, Jimmy said quietly. I'm sorry, but there's more. He handed me another letter, this one from just 2 years ago. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unfold it. David, this one began, and I realized with a sick feeling that this wasn't a letter to Hilda. This was a letter from Hilda, a copy she'd kept hidden in her purse. David, I can't keep doing this to Tyson. He's been so good to me through all the cancer treatments, and the guilt is eating me alive. I know we agreed never to tell him about Wesley, but watching him love that boy so completely when he's not even his father, it's breaking my heart. Sometimes I think I should just confess everything, but then I look at Tyson's face when he talks about Wesley, and I can't destroy that. He loves being a father. He loves believing Wesley is his legacy. How can I take that away from him? The letter continued. I've decided to end this between us. After 20 years, I need to try to be the wife Tyson deserves for whatever time I have left. I know this will hurt you, but please understand. I can't keep betraying the man who's taking care of me while I'm dying. Please don't contact me again. Please let me die with some dignity intact. I love you, but I love him too, and I owe him this much. Goodbye, my dearest friend. I set the letter down with trembling fingers. Hilda had tried to end it. In her final years, she'd tried to choose me, but the damage was already done. The betrayal was already complete. Mr. Garrett, Jimmy said gently, I think maybe you should go home, process this, maybe talk to someone. I looked up at him, this stranger who now knew more about my life than I did. How long has David Richardson been dead? Jimmy frowned. Dead? I don't know anything about him being dead. My blood went cold. What do you mean? I mean, I don't know if he's dead. Why would you think he's dead? I stared at him, my mind racing. His wife died 8 years ago. Hilda went to the funeral, she said. She said David was so heartbroken he moved away to live with his sister in Florida. Jimmy's expression grew troubled. Mr. Garrett, I hate to tell you this, but David Richardson still lives in town. I see him at the grocery store sometimes, never moved anywhere. The room tilted. Everything I thought I knew was a lie. David wasn't dead. David wasn't in Florida. David was still here, in the same town where I'd been grieving my wife for 3 months, believing I was her widowed husband. Where? My voice was barely a whisper. Mr. Garrett, I don't think. Where does he live? Jimmy sighed. Same place he always has, that blue house on Maple Street, 2 blocks from the elementary school. I stood up on unsteady legs. I knew that house. I'd driven past it hundreds of times. It was a modest place with a well-kept garden and a red mailbox. I'd never paid much attention to it, never wondered who lived there, never imagined it housed the man who'd been sleeping with my wife for 20 years. I need to see him, I said. Mr. Garrett, maybe you should think about this. Maybe talk to a counselor or... I need those letters. I reached for the stack on his desk. Jimmy hesitated. Are you sure? Once you take these, once you read them all, you can't unknow what's in them. I looked at him, this kind stranger who was trying to protect me from my own life. I need to know, all of it. He handed me the manila envelope. The purse is yours, no charge. I'm sorry this happened to you, Mr. Garrett. I'm sorry your son put you in this position. I took the purse and the letters, feeling their weight like stones in my hands. As I walked toward the door, Jimmy called after me. Mr. Garrett, whatever you decide to do, be careful. Sometimes the truth destroys more than the lies ever did. I drove home in a daze, the envelope sitting on the passenger seat like a bomb waiting to explode. At every red light, I stared at it, knowing that inside were 18 letters that would rewrite the story of my entire adult life. At home, I sat at my kitchen table and spread the letters out in chronological order. The oldest was from 17 years ago, just a year before Wesley was born. The newest was from 6 months before Hilda died. Almost 2 decades of secret correspondence between my wife and another man. I read them all. Every single word. They started innocent enough, David expressing sympathy for Hilda during a difficult time, offering friendship when I was working long hours at the construction company. But they quickly became more intimate. By the 3rd letter, David was telling Hilda he was falling in love with her. By the 5th, she was telling him she felt the same. The letter from 15 years ago made me physically ill. David describing their first night together, how natural it felt, how they both knew they were meant to be together. Hilda responding that she'd never felt more alive, more loved, more herself than when she was with him. And then, scattered throughout the years, references to Wesley. David asking about our boy. Hilda describing Wesley's first words, his first day of school, his baseball games. David expressing frustration that he couldn't be there for these milestones, couldn't claim his son publicly. By the time I finished reading, it was dark outside. I sat in my empty kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of my wife's double life, and tried to figure out who I was if I wasn't Wesley's father, if I wasn't Hilda's beloved husband, if everything I'd believed about my family was a lie. The phone rang, startling me. Wesley's name appeared on the screen. For the first time in 32 years, I looked at that name and wondered if the boy I'd raised had any right to call me Dad. I let Wesley's call go to voicemail. I couldn't trust myself to speak to him yet, not when every word he'd ever called me Dad now felt like a question mark hanging in the air between us. Instead, I sat in my kitchen until dawn, studying the letters like they were evidence in a crime. which I suppose they were. The morning light streaming through my window felt different somehow, as if the sun itself had shifted while I wasn't paying attention. I made coffee with shaking hands and tried to think clearly about what I needed to do next. The letters proved Hilda had been unfaithful, but they didn't prove Wesley wasn't my son. They only proved that David Richardson believed he might be the father. I needed more than David's hopes and fears. I needed facts. I spent the morning researching David Richardson online. It wasn't hard to find information about him. He'd been a teacher at the local high school for 30 years before retiring 5 years ago. There were photos from school events, newspaper articles about his retirement party, even a Facebook page with pictures of him at community events. Looking at his photos made my stomach churn. David was tall and lean with dark hair that had gone silver at the temples. He had a strong jaw and deep-set brown eyes that looked remarkably similar to Wesley's. How had I never noticed? How had I spent 32 years looking at my son and never wondered why he didn't have my blue eyes or my broader build? I'd always told myself he took after Hilda's side of the family, but now I could see the truth staring back at me from David Richardson's photographs. The resemblance was unmistakable. Around noon, I drove to Maple Street. I told myself I was just going to look. Just going to see the house where the man who might be Wesley's real father lived. But as I parked across the street from the modest blue house with its neat garden and red mailbox, I knew I was lying to myself. I was there because I needed to see him in person. I needed to look David Richardson in the eye and know, once and for all, if my son belonged to him. I didn't have to wait long. At 12:30, the front door opened and David stepped out onto his porch. He was exactly as I'd imagined from the photos. Tall, distinguished, with silver hair and those familiar brown eyes. He was carrying gardening gloves and a small watering can, heading toward his flower beds. Watching him move, I felt a sick recognition settle in my chest. Wesley walked the same way. Had the same way of tilting his head when he was concentrating. Even from across the street, I could see the mannerisms that I'd attributed to Hilda's family but now realized came from this stranger's bloodline. David knelt beside his roses, carefully tending to each plant with the kind of patience I'd never had for gardening. Hilda had always been the one with the green thumb in our house. She'd spent hours in our backyard, nurturing flowers and vegetables with a tenderness that I'd found endearing but never shared. Now I wondered if she'd learned that tenderness from David. If the gentle way she'd cared for growing things was something they'd shared during their secret meetings. If our entire garden was a reflection of another man's influence in my wife's life. I sat in my car for 2 hours, watching David work in his yard. Neighbors stopped to chat with him, and I could see why Hilda might have been drawn to him. He was charming, attentive, the kind of man who listened carefully when people spoke. The kind of man who probably remembered birthdays and anniversaries without being reminded. The kind of man I'd never been. At 2:45, a familiar car pulled into David's driveway. My heart stopped as I recognized Wesley's beat-up Honda Civic. I watched in shock as my son, David's son, got out of the car and walked up to the front door like he belonged there. David answered immediately, and the two of them embraced. Not the awkward handshake you'd give a neighbor's kid, but a real hug. The kind of hug I'd been giving Wesley for 32 years, believing it was my right as his father. They disappeared into the house together, and I sat in my car feeling like my chest was being crushed. Wesley knew. Of course he knew. That's why he'd never seemed to respect me, never seemed to care about my feelings. That's why he could sell his mother's purse without a second thought, because I wasn't really his father, and Hilda's memory meant something different to him than it did to me. I waited another hour before Wesley emerged from the house. He and David stood on the porch talking, and I could see David hand Wesley something, an envelope that Wesley tucked into his jacket pocket. Money, probably. The real father helping his son pay for his cruise while the fake father sat across the street like a fool. Wesley drove away without even glancing in my direction. David stood on his porch for a long moment, looking down the street in the direction Wesley had gone, and the expression on his face was one I recognized. It was the same look I'd had watching Wesley drive away after school plays, after graduation, after every milestone I'd thought we were sharing as father and son. It was the look of a man watching his child leave. That evening, I called my old friend Marcus from the construction company. Marcus had retired the same year I did, and we'd stayed in touch over beer and fishing trips. If anyone would know how to handle this situation, it would be Marcus. "Tyson," he said when he answered. "How you holding up, buddy? I know it's been rough since Hilda passed." "Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." There was a pause. "Okay, shoot." "Did you ever suspect anything about Hilda? About her being unfaithful?" Another long pause. "Tyson, why are you asking me this? Just answer me, please." Marcus sighed heavily. "There were rumors, man. Years ago. People talked about seeing her with David Richardson sometimes. But you seemed happy, and I figured it was just small-town gossip. You never told me. What was I supposed to say? Hey, Tyson, some people think your wife might be cheating on you? Based on what? Seeing them talk at the grocery store. I didn't have proof of anything. I closed my eyes. Even my friends had known. Everyone had known except me. Marcus, I need to ask you about Wesley, about when he was born. Do you remember anything unusual about that time? Unusual how? The timing, the way Hilda acted, anything. Marcus was quiet for so long I thought he'd hung up. Finally he spoke, his voice careful and sad. "Tyson, Wesley was born 8 months after your wedding anniversary. I remember because Sarah and I were trying to figure out what to get you guys for your anniversary that year, and then Hilda went into labor early. We all assumed he was premature, but what? But he was a pretty big baby for being premature. 9 pounds, 3 ounces. Most preemies don't weigh that much. I felt the last piece of my world crumble. Wesley had been born a full-term baby, which meant Hilda had gotten pregnant a month before our anniversary. A month when I'd been working overtime on a big construction project, coming home exhausted every night. A month when she'd had plenty of opportunity to be with David Richardson. "Marcus," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I think Wesley might not be my son." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I could hear Marcus breathing. "Oh, Tyson," he finally said. "Oh, buddy, I'm so sorry. I didn't sleep for 3 days. I kept thinking about Wesley hugging David Richardson on that porch, about the envelope David had handed him, about 32 years of loving a child who had never been mine. By Thursday morning, I knew I couldn't live with the uncertainty anymore. I had to know the truth, even if it destroyed what was left of my family. Wesley had been calling every day since our fight, leaving voicemails that ranged from annoyed to apologetic. "Dad, come on. You're being ridiculous about this purse thing. Dad, I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings, but you're overreacting. Dad, Melissa thinks you're having some kind of breakdown." I finally called him back Thursday afternoon. "Dad, thank God," he said when he answered. "I was starting to worry about you. Look, I'm sorry about the purse, okay? If it means that much to you, I'll find a way to get it back." "I already got it back," I said quietly. "Oh, good. See? Problem solved. So can we move past this now? I leave for the cruise tomorrow, and I don't want us fighting when I go. Wesley, I need you to come over. We need to talk. Can it wait until I get back? I've got a million things to do before tomorrow." No, it can't wait. Something in my voice must have gotten through to him because he was quiet for a moment. "Okay, I'll be there in an hour." I spent that hour sitting at my kitchen table with Hilda's purse in front of me and the manila envelope of letters beside it. I'd read through them so many times I had some passages memorized. The words were burned into my brain like brands. When Wesley knocked on the door, I almost couldn't bring myself to answer it. Once I opened that door, once I asked the questions I needed to ask, there would be no going back. But I'd already lost everything else. I might as well lose the illusion of fatherhood, too. Wesley looked tired when he came in, like he'd been up all night packing. He glanced at the purse on the table and then at me. "So you got Mom's purse back? Good. I'm glad. I really am sorry about selling it, Dad. I know it meant a lot to you." I gestured for him to sit down. He took the chair across from me, the same chair he'd sat in as a boy doing homework while Hilda cooked dinner. How many family dinners had we shared at this table? How many conversations about school and friends and future plans? How many times had I looked across this table at this young man and felt pride in being his father? "Wesley," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." He frowned. "Okay, what's this about?" I reached for the manila envelope and pulled out one of the letters. Wesley's eyes went wide when he saw it. Where did you get that? His voice was sharp, suddenly defensive. They were hidden in your mother's purse, in a secret compartment. I watched his face carefully. You knew about them, didn't you? Wesley's face went pale. He stared at the letter in my hands like it was a loaded gun pointed at his chest. Dad, how long have you known about David Richardson? The question hung in the air between us. Wesley's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Finally, he slumped back in his chair and ran his hands through his hair. Since I was 16, he said quietly. The words hit me like a physical blow. 16 years. Wesley had known for 16 years that I might not be his real father, and he'd never said a word. How did you find out? Wesley was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. I overheard Mom on the phone with him one night. She was crying, talking about how guilty she felt, how she didn't know what to do. I heard her say, "Our son," and I knew. And you never thought to tell me? Wesley looked up at me then, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not defiance or anger, but something colder. Something that looked almost like contempt. Why would I tell you? You weren't my real father anyway. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. Wesley, look, Dad, Tyson, whatever I'm supposed to call you now. You were fine as a father, I guess. You kept a roof over my head and food on the table. But David understood me. He got me in ways you never did. I stared at him, this young man I'd raised, this stranger wearing my son's face. You've been seeing him behind my back for years. He helped me with school, gave me advice about girls, about life. He was there for me in ways you never were. I was there for everything, I said, my voice breaking. Every baseball game, every school play, every scraped knee and broken heart. I was there. Wesley shrugged. You were physically there, sure, but you never really got me. You wanted me to be like you, into construction and fishing and all that blue-collar stuff. David understood that I was different, that I wanted more. What does that mean? It means David has money, real money. He invested well when he was teaching, made smart choices. He's been helping me financially for years. The cruise? He's paying for it. The down payment on my apartment? That was him too. He takes care of me in ways you never could. I felt like I was drowning. So when you sold your mother's purse, I didn't need the money, Wesley said flatly. I just wanted to hurt you. I was tired of pretending we were some happy family when we both knew it was all a lie. The kitchen was silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. I looked at this young man I'd loved unconditionally for 32 years and realized I was looking at a stranger. Maybe I always had been. Does David know you've been taking money from him while still living off me? Wesley's jaw tightened. David knows everything. He knows I've been stuck with you because Mom made me promise to take care of you after she died. He understands how hard this has been for me. How hard this has been for you. I could barely get the words out. Your mother died 3 months ago, Wesley. I've been grieving, and you've been. What? Playing along with your delusions? Pretending to be the son you wanted instead of the son I actually am? Wesley stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. I'm tired of it, okay? I'm tired of pretending we're family when we're not. I'm tired of acting like I care about your feelings when, honestly, I just want to live my own life. I reached into the envelope and pulled out another letter, one of the ones Hilda had written to David. Did you know your mother tried to end things with him? Did you know she chose me in the end? Wesley glanced at the letter and laughed, a sound without warmth or humor. She chose guilt, not you. She felt bad about what she'd done, but that doesn't mean she loved you more. It just means she was tired of living a double life. He walked toward the door, then turned back to face me. David has something for you, by the way. Mom left a letter with him before she died. She made him promise to give it to you if you ever found out about everything. I guess she knew this day would come eventually. What kind of letter? The kind that tells the truth, all of it. Wesley's hand was on the doorknob. If you want it, you know where to find David. But honestly, maybe some truths are better left buried. He paused in the doorway. Oh, and Tyson? Thanks for raising me. You did a decent job, all things considered. But I'm done pretending you're my father. I'm done pretending any of this matters to me. The door closed behind him, and I was alone with the truth. Wesley wasn't just biologically someone else's son. He'd chosen to be someone else's son. For 16 years, he'd been living a double life just like his mother, taking from me while giving his loyalty to another man. I sat at my kitchen table until the sun went down, holding Hilda's letters and trying to understand how I'd been so blind for so long. How I'd missed all the signs, all the clues, all the ways my family had been lying to me, but there was still one more truth waiting for me, one more letter that might explain everything or destroy what little was left of my world. Tomorrow I would go see David Richardson. Tomorrow I would finally learn what my wife had wanted me to know before she died. I knocked on David Richardson's door at 9 in the morning, before I could lose my nerve. The blue house looked different up close, smaller somehow, more ordinary than it had seemed from across the street. Just a regular house where an ordinary man had lived while loving my wife and raising my son in secret. David answered the door immediately, as if he'd been waiting for me. He looked older than he had in his yard, more fragile, with lines around his brown eyes that spoke of years of carrying secrets. "Tyson," he said quietly, "I've been expecting you." He led me into a living room that was neat and comfortable, filled with books and plants and photographs. I tried not to look too closely at the pictures, afraid of what I might see, but I caught glimpses of Wesley at various ages, photos that should have been in my house instead of here. "Would you like some coffee?" David asked. I shook my head. "Wesley said you have a letter from Hilda." David nodded and walked to a desk in the corner of the room. He pulled out a sealed envelope, yellowed with age, and held it for a moment before handing it to me. "She gave this to me 2 weeks before she died," he said. "She made me promise to give it to you only if you found out about us on your own. She said if you never found out, I should take it to my grave." I stared at the envelope. My name was written on it in Hilda's familiar handwriting, but underneath my name, she'd written something else. The truth, finally. My hands were shaking as I opened it. The letter was several pages long, written in the careful script Hilda had always used for important things. "My dearest Tyson," it began, "if you're reading this, then you've discovered my secret, and I can only imagine how much I've hurt you. There are no words to express how sorry I am for the pain I've caused you, but I need you to understand the whole truth before you judge me completely." I had to stop reading and look up at David, who was sitting across from me with his hands folded in his lap, waiting patiently for me to continue. "She told you what's in this letter?" I asked. "Every word," he said. "She wrote it here, at this table, while I held her hand. She was so sick by then, but she insisted on getting it all down." I looked back at the letter. "I met David 3 years into our marriage, when you were working such long hours trying to establish the construction business. I was lonely, Tyson. I know that's not an excuse, but it's the truth. David was kind to me when I needed kindness, and what started as friendship became something more." The letter went on to describe their relationship, how it had grown over years of stolen moments and secret meetings. But then, several paragraphs in, Hilda had written something that made me stop breathing. "I need you to know that Wesley is your son, Tyson. He is absolutely, completely, 100% your biological child. The timing of my relationship with David makes this impossible to doubt. I know there may be letters that suggest otherwise. David wanted so desperately to be a father, and I let him believe what he needed to believe. But you are Wesley's father in every way that matters, biological and otherwise." I read the paragraph 3 times before the words sank in. Wesley was my son, my biological son. Everything I'd believed, everything I'd feared, everything that had been tearing me apart for the past week. It was all based on David's wishful thinking and Hilda's guilt. "She lied to you," I said to David, my voice barely above a whisper. David nodded, tears in his eyes. "I know. I've always known, deep down. The timing never quite worked out the way I wanted it to. But I loved them both so much that I convinced myself it was possible. Hilda let me pretend because she felt guilty about our relationship, and I think she thought it would be easier for me if I believed Wesley was mine." I continued reading. "David has been a good friend to our family, Tyson, and Wesley has benefited from having another man in his life who cares about him. But make no mistake, you are his father. You raised him. You shaped him. You loved him unconditionally. David may have given him money and advice, but you gave him everything else." The letter went on. "I know you must be wondering why I never ended things with David sooner, and the truth is that I tried many times over the years. But he was going through his own struggles, his wife's long illness, his loneliness after she died, and I felt responsible for his happiness. I know that's not fair to you, but I couldn't seem to break away completely until I got sick myself." Near the end of the letter, Hilda had written, I am dying, Tyson, and I need you to know that despite everything I've done wrong, you have been the love of my life. David was my escape, my secret garden, but you have been my home. You have been my safe harbor, my constant, my truest friend. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope someday you can understand that loving him never meant I loved you less. The final paragraph broke my heart. Wesley doesn't know the truth about his paternity. He suspects David might be his father, and I've never corrected that assumption because I thought it might be easier for him to have David as a backup plan in case something happened to you. But Tyson, he is yours. He is your legacy, your blood, your son. Don't let my mistakes take that away from you. Don't let my selfishness destroy the relationship you've built with the boy who needs you more than he knows. I set the letter down and looked at David, who was crying quietly into his hands. She loved you both, I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. But she chose me in the end. David nodded. She did, and she was right too. You were the better man, Tyson. You were always the better man. But Wesley believes you're his father. I know, and I've let him believe it because I wanted it to be true so badly. I've been giving him money, treating him like my son, because it was the closest I could come to having the family I always wanted. I thought about Wesley's coldness toward me, his casual cruelty, his assumption that I meant nothing to him. He's been taking money from both of us. Yes, and I'm ashamed to say I encouraged it. I wanted him to need me more than he needed you. David wiped his eyes. I've been a selfish old fool, Tyson. I've been living a fantasy and letting it hurt your relationship with your son. I stood up, suddenly feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Wesley was my son. Whatever else was true, whatever else had been lies and secrets and betrayals, that fundamental fact remained unchanged. I was his father, and nothing could take that away from me. What happens now? David asked. I looked at him, this broken man who had loved my wife and stolen my son's loyalty through deception and money. I should have felt anger, should have wanted revenge. Instead, I felt something closer to pity. Now you tell Wesley the truth, I said. You tell him his mother's final letter explains everything and that he's been wrong about his paternity. You tell him that if he wants a relationship with his real father, he's going to have to stop taking money from the man who isn't. David nodded. And if he doesn't want a relationship with you? I thought about that for a moment. Wesley had shown me who he really was over the past week. He was selfish, cruel, willing to hurt people for money and status. Maybe that was partly my fault as a parent, or maybe that was just who he'd chosen to become. Then I'll know I did my best, I said, and I'll move on with my life. I walked toward the door, then turned back. David, stop giving him money. Stop letting him believe you're his father. Stop encouraging him to disrespect me. If you really care about Wesley, help him become a better man instead of enabling him to be a worse one. David nodded. I will. I promise. 3 months later, I was sitting on a beach in Florida, watching the sunset and sipping a beer. I'd sold the house, too many memories, too many ghosts, and bought a small condo near the ocean. I'd always wanted to live by the water, but Hilda had preferred the mountains. Now I could choose for myself. Wesley had called once after David told him the truth. He'd been angry, confused, hurt by the revelation that his real father was the man he'd been treating so poorly. He'd asked if we could start over. Build a real relationship based on honesty instead of lies. I'd thought about it for a long time before answering. Maybe someday, I'd told him. But first, you need to figure out who you want to be. The kind of man who sells his mother's memory for cruise money, or the kind of man who honors the people who love him. He hadn't called since then, and that was okay. I'd done my job as his father. I'd raised him, provided for him, loved him unconditionally for 32 years. If he chose to throw that away for money and status, that was his decision to live with. I'd learned something important in the aftermath of discovering Hilda's secret life. Love doesn't require perfection, and forgiveness doesn't require forgetting. Hilda had betrayed me, but she'd also loved me. Wesley had disappointed me, but he was still my son. David had deceived me, but he'd also suffered his own losses and loneliness. The truth had set me free, but not in the way I'd expected. It hadn't destroyed my family. It had revealed that my family had been an illusion for years, and that revelation, painful as it was, had given me permission to build something real for myself. I raised my beer to the setting sun and made a toast to Hilda, to the woman I'd loved and the woman I'd never really known. Then I made a toast to myself, to the man I'd been and the man I was becoming. For the first time in my 64 years, I was living for myself alone, and it felt like freedom.